When I'm not talking about the brain, I'm working with senior executives from many large organizations and many technical people. I find my day job is kind of translating what might be thought of as soft skills for a technical audience to understand how to optimize processing. So that's enough about me. I want to talk about these 4 surprises. The rational is overrated, massively overrated. The emotions, we've got emotions backward. Social issues are primary, literally primary, and attention actually changes the brain. We're going to spend most time on probably the first and second, and a bit on the third. I'm going to stop after each and see if you have questions or comments. And if I go too fast, you can slow me down. If you want me to speed up, it's Google. I can speed up as well. Just get to the point. We can do whatever you like. All right. The rational is overrated. What do I mean by that? Let's give you a little metaphor. When you're trying to hold information in mind, you're trying to actually hold information, you're going to start using your prefrontal cortex, PFC for short. I shorten it so it takes less space in your PFC. When you try to hold information in mind, which is to understand, decide, recall, memorize, inhibit, when you try to do that, you've got to use your prefrontal cortex, which is a very limited region of the brain. Those of you who drove to work today, you didn't really use your prefrontal cortex to drive here. You're using deeper regions that you can use without thinking. Like, you can drive without having to think about where you're going if you've gone somewhere a lot. If you're actually consciously thinking, you've got to use your prefrontal cortex. And this is where the trouble begins. Let me do a little experiment. Just call an answer out. What's 1 plus 1? No prefrontal cortex, right? No effort. What's 10 plus 10? No prefrontal cortex. What's 56 plus 175? Laughter. No one wants to do it. Okay. Do you get that? Why don't you want to do it? Why don't you want to do it? Because you've got to put in a bit of effort. You've got to actually stop other things you might be thinking about, because when you use this process, it becomes a serial process. You can do one thing at a time. And you've got to use effort. And did you sense a little bit of uh-oh, don't take me there, like I'm not going there? It's a subtle threat. The reason it's a subtle threat to have to think is we evolved at a time when resources, metabolic resources, were really limited. War and famine, we lived to 20 at best. And so we're kind of rewarded for minimizing mental resources. It's very easy, in this country in particular, to make an absolute fortune basically helping people put in less and less effort into any particular thing. Have you noticed that? It's very difficult to kind of do the opposite. And in many ways, Google exists because it helps people find things with less effort as well. Okay, and can measure that in milliseconds. So using this cortex, when you have to do an addition, we sort of avoid it. We go, I don't really want to do that. It's a threat response, and that threat response does something, so we kind of don't do it very much. And this is a bit of a challenge. Now, let me give you the metaphor to understand it. If the amount of information you can hold in your prefrontal cortex at one time, sometimes it's called working memory and it has other titles, but if the amount of information you can hold in this region is equivalent to, say, a cubic foot, then the amount of information that the rest of your brain holds is equivalent to about the Milky Way. So they're kind of different. You get that sense, right? It's a little disambiguous to say it, but they're really massively different. And this explains a tremendous number of life's experiences. Because what we do is we firstly try to avoid using this region of the brain. We do things that we know how to do well rather than doing something differently. And anything that we do a few times, we quickly start to embed the pattern so we don't have to think about it. And essentially, when you're trying to make someone think, like trying to change a pattern or change a system or install some software or do anything, you're going to get this threat response because people are, going to have to think, and they're attuned not to. So it explains a tremendous amount. But this rational resource is what people put so much kind of credence into. It's we've really got to be rational, and Spock was all about really being deeply rational. It turns out the rational is really, really overrated, and it's overrated in 2 ways. Firstly, what you can do with it. And secondly, it's actually not how we solve most problems. The rational is not how we solve most problems, which I'll come back to. But there's some studies showing that every time you do a little math puzzle like that, or any conscious decision, you actually use up a limited bucket of resources. Every time you make a decision, solve a problem, your blood glucose goes down, and your performance on the next task goes down. So it's really a limited resource that depletes very quickly. And you can actually start to look at this and sort of pull apart 3 types of thinking that we do. and start to treat this resource of your prefrontal resource as something that you've got to kind of manage. So, level 1 thinking is basically stuff like 1 + 1. You don't have to think. And isn't it fun deleting emails? Does anyone else get joy deleting emails? It's wonderful, isn't it? It's like, I fly a lot, and one of the things I love to do when I'm flying, if I really can't do anything else, is delete. And one time, I was on a long flight, I saw the bottom of my email inbox. Isn't that incredible? It's just like never happens, Anyway, so you can do that without thinking. Level 2, scheduling a meeting. You've got to hold things in mind, what time, where, who, when, maybe 5 seconds, 10 seconds. What about writing a pitch, writing some coding? Building a plan, building a strategy? That takes a lot of glucose, and it takes a lot of effort and energy. Now, what many people do, they get to work, they do number 1 and then number 2 first, and then they've got very little energy left for number 3. And their brain actually becomes tired and noisy. And I'll talk about the noisy in a moment. And they become really, really ineffective. So the sort of intuitive approach that we have to tackling our day is wrong from the brain's perspective. So this is one of the first things. The rational is overrated. It would be really rational to get to work, start working on emails, and work through. That's really rational. It's not how your brain really wants to work. Now, there's kind of a question that I pose to people often, and it's sort of one of the questions in the book, which is, if you truly respected attention as a limited resource, what would you do differently? If you really accepted that you've probably only got a few hours of really quality deep processing time, level 3 activity, what would you do differently if you really thought about that? And it's quite an important conversation to have, I believe, in an organization that's processing a lot mentally. Now, here's the challenge though. Most problems we solve are not solved rationally. And in the lab, we see that the PFC not only isn't the source of the solution, but is actually the source of not finding the solution. The prefrontal cortex, rational resources, actually stop you solving problems a lot of the time. And in the lab, we see that about 60% of problems that people solve, they actually can't explain how they solve them. It's just, you have that experience all the time. You're walking to work, and suddenly you get an idea. Where did that idea come from? You weren't working on anything. Where did it come from? You're in the shower, you're on the treadmill, you're doing something, and suddenly you have this answer coming to you. Why couldn't you have that when you wanted to? You know that feeling? Why couldn't you have solved that problem where you went? Well, you can if you understand your brain a bit better. And it turns out that the very thing that you normally use to solve problems is the inhibitor of solutions if the problems are complex. It's the inhibitor. Your prefrontal cortex is the inhibitor. And there's a whole framework around this that I won't go into too far, but there's a study of insight now. About the last 5 years, there's been a study of insight. And this was published in my last book that a few people here have been reading called Quiet Leadership. And you can actually now understand how insights occur. And I'll give you just the cliff notes, kind of the most valuable piece. And that is that in order for insight to happen, you actually have to stop thinking. You have to stop any form of conscious, mental, deliberate process to have these insights. And there's a couple of complex reasons for that. But let me give you a demonstration of it first. And let's see kind of how you go with this. This is a simple puzzle. You've basically got 5 words there. Time flies like an arrow. And it normally means time moves swiftly in one direction. Time goes straight ahead, time goes forward. Can anyone think of a different interpretation of those 5 words? Like quite a substantially different interpretation. Anyone think of one over here?
If you are keeping track of fruit flies, and you're trying to time them, you should time them in the same way that you time.
Very good. Okay, so that was a record for that answer. So you guys have very good hiring processes because people never get so quickly to an answer like that. Anyone else get one? Yeah, over here.
Some type of fly called a time fly.
Very good. Okay, anyone else get one? Absolutely. So what does it require to come up with these different solutions? What does it require mentally? You've got to kind of dampen down this solution in your brain. You've got to and it's pretty easy to do with just 5 words, much harder to do with a complex project. But you've got to actually dampen down the existing solution and go, I'm going to think about this fresh. I'm going to unlock, the word time in the sort of structure it is, in the sentence structure. I'm going to reimagine it, okay? And I'll give you 5 of them. Check the speed of flies the way you would time an arrow. Check the speed of flies only if they're similar to an arrow. Check the speed of flies the way an arrow would. And my favorite, time flies, a type of fly, are fond of arrows, which you got. And there's some more if you get subtle, but many people have tremendous difficulty with this because they're not experienced at dampening down their own thinking, and clearly you guys have developed great cognitive control. You know when it's time to kind of stop thinking one way and try thinking another way. It's a very, very important capacity for maximizing internal processing. So insight involves stopping thinking about the problem and allowing a completely different solution to come through. And this is a summary of Mark Beeman's research on insight. And they see an alpha wave, which is, you can see the purple line up there. The alpha wave is the brain going into idle just for a couple of seconds. The good news is it's not 2 months, it's 2 seconds. But when you put the brain into idle, it's like putting a car into neutral, and things just kind of can come through. The basic science of this is a little complex to explain in a short time, but essentially a thought, like if I say picture an elephant, if I say picture an elephant, that's going to be a connection between millions, if not billions, of neurons, and the electrical activity given off as that circuit creates is quite high. It's kind of it's like a high amplitude electrical activity on an EEG. But if you're trying to solve a problem, the solution that your brain comes up with in your unconscious, it's your unconscious that solves it, not your conscious mind. The solution might involve a circuit between only a few thousand or a few tens of hundreds of neurons. And so there's a lot less electrical activity. And electrical activity means arousal, and it means dopamine, and you need to be able to notice spikes of dopamine to be able to notice information. So put all that together, you basically get the fact that if you're operating really with a loud brain all the time, you're not able to see the subtle signals. And it's like you don't kind of hear a quiet cell phone at a loud party if it's really, really loud. So the ability to have these insights very much comes to this ability to quieten down your overall mental activity at any time. And people who can do that, people who have strong cognitive control, which you can tell in a scanner before you give them a task, those people have a lot more insights. The other thing that I can tell you about insights that's kind of surprising is basically an answer to the question of where they come from. Where they come from is weak associations. If you want to have insights, you've got to practice detecting weak associations. And there's a story about this, which is a true story. It involves a monk, but it's not an apocryphal story. It's a real story with a monk. And this monk went into Mark Beeman's lab to test out kind of what happens when he has insights. And he went into the machine, and he tried to solve problems with insight, and he didn't really solve any. And that was very unusual. And Mark said to the guy, what are you doing? What strategy are you using? And the monk said, I'm really focusing on the problem. And Mark said, right, don't focus on the problem. Focus on being unfocused. Focus on letting anything come into your attention, on being actually completely unfocused. And what happened was the monk became an insight machine. And this ability to detect weak associations is really, really important. And there's a very, very strong correlate between this and anxiety and happiness. The more anxious you are, the less of these weak connections you notice. And the more happy you are, the more of these weak associations that you notice. And we think it's because you literally open up your field of view when you're happy, and you close down your field of view when you're unhappy, and that occurs internally and externally. Okay, so the table tennis table and the pool table and all that stuff where you just kind of goof off and just have some fun, that turns out to actually be very useful for complex problem solving. If you can shift yourself from anxiety to happiness, you'll get a pretty substantial shift in the total number of problems you'll solve from insight. Okay, so that may be explaining a few things that you already know, but just to kind of summarize this idea, we significantly emphasize the rational, and it turns out that our rational resources are very limited, a few hours a day, and our rational resources are not used to solve most problems. And so I'll just pose a question to you before we go on. A question to you is, what does this explain that you already do, and what does it suggest maybe you do differently? That's a kind of a question I pose for you, or you can pose a question for me. We'll just see if anyone has any questions or comments before we go on to the second one. Over here, from a neuroscientist. Fantastic. I get an immediate threat response. You're going to give me a pop quiz. Okay.
How does flow fit into this?
Flow is an interesting phenomenon, obviously. Generally what happens with flow is you're using deeply embedded circuits that you don't have to think about much to use, but you're using them in a slightly different way. So you're doing something you know how to do really well, but you're doing it slightly differently in a way that's really stretching you. So it's not completely uncertain. So what's happening is you're getting a positive feedback loop of dopamine, because novelty creates, and new circuits create dopamine, but you're not having to put in all this effort to create this wide-scale new circuits. You see that? And so you get this lovely positive feedback loop in dopamine that happens. So if you're doing something really difficult that's brand new, you get a lot more norepinephrine, noradrenaline, more of a threat from the uncertainty in that way. Yeah, anyone else? Yeah, over there.
You solve most of the problems without the conscious mind. Then what is the conscious mind good for?
Well, not really much, given it's only a cubic foot in terms of the information it can hold. I mean, they think of it as kind of the caretaker of the building. It does a little, sweeping around the edges and kind of keeping things tidy. And I mean, it does a lot of things. It's the only region of the brain that actually is connected to every other region. And you guys had Dan Siegel here. He's one of my favorite people in the world. And he talks about, the model of the hand where the prefrontal here is connected to the whole brain. And it's really the only region of the brain that has a braking system. And this is one of the important functions, braking as in stopping, not braking. It's the only region of the brain that has a braking system in it. So you've got all these brain regions which are huge, which are like, Milky Way sized, for thinking, for emoting, for moving, for all these different functions. And you've only got one brain region, which is the right and left temple, that is in the prefrontal. It's called the right and left ventrolateral prefrontal. And this region is involved in stopping both motor functions and thinking and feeling and everything else. So it's your task, it's your structure for inhibiting automatic responses is one of the things that we think. And actually deliberately, it's for many other things, but that's one of its really important functions. Without that, you're an automaton. If you don't activate your brakes, you'll do whatever your fears and motivations will have you do, which is often not in your or everyone else's best interests, to put it mildly. So the other thing that the prefrontal cortex does is very unusual. Lower primates don't have much. It allows us to imagine. So if you think of this as a stage, if you think of your prefrontal cortex as a stage, putting aside the braking structure, what you actually do is you get information from several places. You can get information coming in right now and hold it on your stage and compare it to existing information in your brain and understand a new idea as a result. And that's kind of cool, but other creatures do that a bit. What you can also do, though, is you can get information from inside your brain and combine it with other information from inside your brain and make up something completely new. So you can take info from long-term memory and you can combine them in different ways. So you basically get this kind of playing field where you can do stuff. They call it sometimes a mental sketch pad. And so you've got this ability to imagine and make stuff up. And that includes imagining what it's like to be you, imagining what it's like to be other people, imagining all sorts of things. And those are two sides of the same coin as well, by the way. So I think those are the two really significant things. Remember, it's dramatically smaller than the rest of the brain. But the braking system is really important so that you actually regulate automatic functions, and the other one is so that you can actually invent and create. And this issue of regulating is really significant because your capacity to regulate emotions, which is where we're going, is a nice segue question, thank you. Your capacity to regulate emotions is absolutely central to success in life. And has anyone heard of the marshmallow experiment? You might have had someone talk, where like a few more minutes on that is, many extra scores in your SAT. That is pure self-regulation. It's pure right and left ventrolateral prefrontal activity that's enabling you to dampen down other things. So this ability to regulate emotions is really critical. Now, the thing with emotions is we have them backwards, though. And we've really completely misinterpreted how to manage emotions in the wider society. I'd say people who are successful in this organization probably would not have this problem or you wouldn't succeed. But in the wider society, we tend to have it backwards. Let me give you a little primer. I'm sure you've heard about the limbic system. I won't do Brain 101, but the basic thing to know is it's extremely skittish. Your limbic system is constantly on the lookout for potential threats, and it does something very interesting. I'm going to turn this one on and do a little drawing here. We got that working? There we go. I'm going to do a little drawing here. This is not an anatomically correct drawing in any way, but if this is your prefrontal cortex here, and you've got the deeper limbic system, the limbic system is making a decision every moment about everything that you interact with in the world. So every book cover that you see, you decide, hey, that's good. I'm going to go toward that. Or that's a kind of a threat. I'm going to stay away from that. It's a potential reward or it's a potential threat. You do that with every chair. Oh, that chair looks comfortable. That chair looks dangerous. With every person. You actually do it with every phoneme, every sound. And your brain does it with nonsense words that have absolutely no meaning. They classify them into reward or threat. And it's a very important overarching principle. In fact, it's probably the only major organizing principle of the brain, according to a meta-study of thousands of brain studies. That the organizing principle is, firstly, minimize danger, secondly, maximize reward. That's the organizing principle. Companies have organizing principles, don't they? Minimize costs, maximize revenues. There's some parallels there. Anyway, with the limbic system, it's dramatically more likely for you to go the threat state because your brain's kind of evolved at a time when, the people who are hypersensitive to threat survived, basically. You've probably heard that. But what's fascinating is the difference between the threat and reward. And if this is reward and this is threat and this is time, you're walking along the street to work in the morning, and assuming some of you walk, and you're walking along to the street, and you see someone that you really like. You don't stop and think about them. You just see them, you notice them. In that moment, this is time in seconds. Your brain will slowly kind of get a little slight reward response, and it'll start to taper off. A little reward response. For those of you, it's a little low, it's a little technical challenge there. Then you're walking along and you see someone that attacked you last week at work, not physically, but they just said your ideas were crazy, which turns out to be actually as bad as a physical threat for your brain, but we'll get to that. Anyway, what happens is you see that person and you go, woof, and you go straight down immediately, and you don't just go down faster, you go down much deeper, you stay down much longer, and it's much harder to displace. So the statement bad is stronger than good doesn't do it justice. Bad is stronger, longer lasting, deeper, harder to move, and all the rest of it, which is why, when a really tragic situation, happens like last week, with something difficult, terrible news, the only people who are really happy are media conglomerates who know that it's going to get a lot more people's attention. Because this literally bad gets attention. This is what this is about. Attention, it goes to the negative. Okay, so this is an important function to understand because your brain's going to go to the negative all the time. And you might say, well, so what? Why does that matter? Well, the reason it matters is this limbic system has a very important function of keeping you alive. But I'm just going to draw this here. This is the threat response, and this is the reward response. This is, threat and reward. There we go, so you can see it there. It's easier to hold things there than hold it in your mind. Less glucose to process. So what happens is the degree of activation of this limbic system, which can be either threat or reward, and this is activation, right? That's a lot of activation, a little bit of activation. The degree of activation of your limbic system is the degree of deactivation of your prefrontal cortex. And it turns out that even a small thing like seeing someone that you don't like much has quite a measurable impact on your ability to solve problems and make decisions. And the more this is aroused, the less function you have here. So this can go very quickly from a cubic foot to a cubic inch, or even less. And it's really remarkable how this happens at such low levels. And I'll give you one story I write about in the book. It's a study of two groups of students completing a maze. It's just a piece of paper. One group of students, the maze has a mouse in the middle and a piece of cheese at the end. The other group, there's a mouse and an owl. And there's no priming deliberately involved. The experimenters just say, complete the maze and then do some creativity experiments afterwards. And the differential in problem solving afterwards was about 50%. There's about a 50% better problem solving ability in the people going for the cheese. So this is like an amount of threat you can hardly even sense, you don't even know it's there, has a very profound impact on all sorts of things. And the other thing to know is that's deliberate problem solving, but also the unconscious problem solving, the insight. That little bit of threat creates a lot of noise, and your brain needs quiet to solve problems. So what we need to do is learn to regulate emotions, and this is where we get it backwards. This is where we get it backwards. Because in society, we tend to do the exact opposite of what we need. And let me give you a little context. This is from actually James Gross from Stanford, who's down the road from here. He's the founding father of emotion regulation research, and his work's been repeated by Kevin Oxner and other neuroscientists in the last 5 years, and some fascinating findings. What we see is that when you experience a threat, things change. When you experience the moment where sort of something kicks in, your world changes. What happens is this gets aroused and this goes down. By the way, it happens with strong positive threats. It's just they're much rarer. Okay, does anyone here play poker and willing to admit to it? Anyone here? A little hand in the corner. There you go. What happens if you get like 2 aces on the flop?
I think I will start at least internally smiling.
You start internally smiling, and you feel pretty good. Have you ever lost a lot of money getting 2 aces on the flop? Have you ever noticed like, yeah, most people I've spoken to who play, until they learn this trick, what happens is that the strong positive actually inhibits your processing, and you miss things that you wouldn't normally miss. You become like too happy, and too happy actually isn't a really good state. What you want to be is just to the right of neutral for maximum processing. Remember, this session is about maximum optimizing internal processing, okay? You want to be just to the right of neutral, just slightly positive. So what happens is when an emotion kicks in, everything changes, strong negative or strong positive, strong negative more likely. You've got 3 choices you can make at that moment. One is the one my 6-year-old does very well, which is to let the emotion out, okay? We all came out like that, didn't we? We came out kicking and screaming. And then we learn to what? We learn to suppress. We learn to push it down, which is to try not to let other people feel, see that you're feeling it. One of the funniest things in the world is watching a 6-year-old try to pretend that you can't see what they're feeling. When you can absolutely see what they're feeling. It's very funny. Anyway, you try to suppress the emotion, and the other techniques which we'll talk about is cognitive change. Cognitive change requires the very thing that diminishes very fast when an emotion kicks in. So you may only have 1 or 2 seconds to use a cognitive change strategy when a threat response kicks in, because your square foot, which is your braking system, is needed for cognitive change. That square foot shrinks fast, like in fractions of a second, it's going really fast downhill. So let me explain this firstly, let me tell you about the challenges of suppression. When you suppress an emotion, actually your limbic system stays as bad or gets worse, your memory goes out the door, and you make other people uncomfortable. People's blood pressure goes up, even third parties that know nothing that's going on. So suppressing emotions has a terrible cognitive effect, and it's really the worst thing to do, and it's the very thing that most people do. Cognitive change strategies, on the other hand, there's no impact on arousal, no change to memory, and no effect on others. So they're very, very good, but they require being aware of internal states quickly. If you're someone who doesn't know what you're feeling at any time, and you're sort of oblivious to that, and you're thinking about the world, but you never think about what your states are, it'll be very difficult to use cognitive change strategies. So what are the 2 major ones? Well, firstly, let me tell you the 2 major ones put on the brakes automatically, whether you mean to or not. And the 2 cognitive change strategies activate this more and this less. So they reverse the seesaw that's the other way. The first one's called labeling, or emotional labeling. It's where you define an emotional state in a word or 2. You define an experience without going into the story of it. If you go into the story, it'll make the emotion worse. The ironic thing is when people are polled, people say, I don't want to talk about emotions because it's going to make them worse. And so we instead suppress. But actually, in the lab, we see that when you speak about an emotion and just label it in a word or 2, even when you have no idea you're in an emotional regulation task, it automatically puts on the brakes and automatically dampens down the threat response. Okay, so you're in a meeting and you're feeling just weird and something's going on, and you just go, I don't know what's going on, and then you go, oh, that's right, I'm hungry. That's why I can't focus. That's a kind of gross example of the situation. Suddenly you feel more able to focus by knowing that you're hungry. Or I'm angry, at this person over there. It's really taking up cognitive resources. And as you put words on, it decreases it. If you can say that out loud, if it becomes part of the culture to say it, you activate a stronger braking network, and it dampens it down even more than just thinking it, okay? Because speaking is more attention density than just thinking. So that's one strategy. It's not what we do in society. We do the opposite. We generally suppress with a terrible cognitive load as a result. Okay, the other strategy is one that anyone who wants to make it as a leader in any organization has to develop. It's called reappraisal. It goes by other names like reframing, recontextualizing, and all sorts of things. In the lab, we call it reappraisal. It's what you need for strong hits. It's very simple. It's changing your entire interpretation of an event. All right, so you're driving to work, and we seem to have a theme of driving to work today. I've been doing a lot of traveling. Can you see? Can you tell? You're driving to work, and you hit some traffic, and you suddenly find you're absolutely stopped, and you're starting to get really anxious, and you notice it, and you say, I'm going to have to reinterpret this, or I'm going to have a really bad day, And you go, how can I do that? You've got to use your resources fast. You go, what kind of opportunity could I turn this into? And if you don't do it quickly, you won't see any opportunity in it. You'll only see a threat. But if you do it quickly, you can go, I know I'm going to call my mother and have a great chat with her. I'm going to use the time to do something really great. I'm going to use the time to pull over and do some yoga, which I've really wanted to do. I'm going to really get into that. Like it's changing your interpretation of the event, The other night I was at the airport, and for 2 days straight, my plane was massively delayed, and I had a big presentation the next day, and I reinterpreted and said, oh cool, I've got 2.5 hours, totally unplanned, of total downtime undisturbed, where I can plug in and just really get some things out. and I just focused and really got some things out. So you all do that. You wouldn't survive in this kind of organization without, strong capacity. The trouble is people who are logical and linear say, no, I want to deal with the data. I just want to grin and bear it. I want to suppress. Men are more likely to do that. I don't want to make up stories and reinterpret. I'm going to see things as they are. That's not so good, and I'll show you the evidence. There's a study of about several hundred people by James Gross, actually. He classified people in just a very simple diametric. He said, what do you do when a strong emotional hit comes along? When a strong emotion experience comes to you, what do you do? Do you suppress it, or do you invent a different story and reinterpret it? And he then measured them on all sorts of scales. And the middle line is the average. I should probably point at this one. That's hard to see all of it. Middle line is the average. And what he found is people who suppress more significantly below average on optimism, environmental mastery, positive relationships, and life satisfaction. The people who reappraised more were significantly above average on this side. The only definer whatsoever was, do you suppress or do you reappraise? It's a really significant determiner of success as a leader, or even just as a team member, because you get strong emotional hits all the time. If you're someone who suppresses, your problem-solving ability is going to go down every time. Your memory is going to go down. Other people won't like you. If you learn to reappraise, it's different. Now, one of the coolest things I ever heard, and it blew me away so much I sort of had to lie down for an hour, was that the more you understand about your brain, and listen to this, the more you understand about your brain, the more you can actually reappraise all sorts of internal strong threats that come along. Because you can go, oh gosh, I'm so crazy, I'm such an idiot, oh, hang on, that's just my brain. You can actually recognize internal experiences and reappraise them as brain functioning, not you, as things that are, something that you can change, but you change the interpretation. And you shift from a threat state to a toward state, and you start to see more options. Question over there.
Yeah, what about the third axis on that scale, which is you don't suppress, you don't reappraise, you just get really pissed off?
Yeah, expression. The question was, what happens with the third axis? What if you express? Well, that'll depend. I've got an actor friend, and she expresses all the time. It's great. If you express, if you just get pissed off and you express, that's fine, but it's, how should we say, it's maladaptive in the workplace. You also notice you'll get fired fast, and no one wants to work with you. Expression's fine if it works for your environment. It's just non-adaptive. I mean, as a leader, what you'll want to express all the time is your intense desire to throttle your employees because they're not doing what you want. You won't have many followers pretty fast. So, expression's fine. The emotion may pass, it may go, but it stays in the people around you. So that's often not so good. I want to get to the third piece because we've got little time left, and then I think this is where it kind of comes together. Let's bring this together into this final piece, which is that social issues are primary. And we've really, as I was saying, we've really got emotions backward. We tend to actually do exactly the wrong thing to manage them. But there's even bigger insights from the brain about social issues, and it's quite surprising. Has anyone here heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the triangle? It's really great, it's really organized. There's a really teeny tiny small problem, which is it's kind of wrong. And it's right in many ways, just to honor his work, it's really helpful. But Maslow sort of says, primary needs are primary, and that's what we focus on first, like food and water and shelter, and we've got to have that stuff. And social needs, where does he put those? Right up there. That's not how your brain functions. How your brain functions is social needs are primary needs, okay? And the experiments on this from the social cognitive affective neuroscience field are phenomenal. Let me give you a little metaphor. Let's say, what's her name again? Johnny. Let's say, Johnny, you come to work, and on the way to work, you sort of trip and you hurt your leg, and you've got a little bit of pain. Then as you try and focus on a coding project or something, every few minutes, the pain will take over your attention because it's an alert signal. It's a threat response saying your life is in danger, focus on this pain. And so you won't be able to focus as much. Okay, now if you then take some aspirin, which inhibits the pain in 5 different pain regions, you will be able to focus more because the threat response goes down. So pain is a threat response saying you're in danger, do something. Now, if you don't fall like that, but you're on the way to work and someone says to you, hey, I think there's a real problem with that project that you worked on, and you decide that means, maybe incorrectly, you decide that means that they're putting down your work and saying that you've made a mistake, you're going to get also a threat response. And you might feel really angry and actually in a kind of pain. And what's really surprising is if you also then took an aspirin, that pain would also diminish, and you would see diminished activation of the same 5 pain regions as if you were feeling physical pain. And in placebo-controlled studies, we've seen very clearly that social pain activates the same regions of the brain as physical pain. And social rewards, like even saying to someone, good job, in a computer voice, to a simple task, activates the dopaminergic reward center more than money. It's insane. It's not rational. But the brain is deeply, deeply social. Now, it does make sense, and here's how. If you're a wolf, you get resources from the wild. So you've got great wiring for smell, smelling a dead carcass 1,000 feet away. My daughter can smell chocolate from the other room, but she can't smell a carcass, across the suburb, right? But you don't get resources from the wild, do you? Where do you get them? From the moment you're born, from other people. So you've got massive circuitry for other people, for reading their intentions. That's one of the biggest ones. For reading their goals, intentions, their emotions. Can I trust or distrust? So you've got huge swathes. At 6 months old, you detect there's jealousy, all sorts of things. So we've got massive amount of social circuitry. And I summarized a whole ton of the social neuroscience that's been happening into a paper that's been currently one of the most popular papers out there in sort of the business world, called Managing with the Brain in Mind. And it's a summary of the major social threats and rewards that are actually driving our behavior. And these are actually the brain's own goals when it comes to the social world. The first one is status. The second one is certainty. The third one is autonomy. The fourth one is having taller whiteboards. The third one is relatedness. And the final one is fairness. I'll put this up on screen so you can see this. It'll be a little bit easier. I didn't think ahead that far for how low that would go. Status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, fairness. Let me just put this up on screen so you don't have to hold it in mind. It'll be easier to see it. Okay, here's how it works. Your brain keeps track of pain, and when you experience pain, you get a threat, and it keeps track of pleasure. When you experience pleasure, you want more of it, you go toward it. It keeps track of domains like water, like temperature. Your brain keeps track of a whole series of environmental domains using the primary reward and threat circuitry. Your brain also keeps track of these social domains using the primary reward and threat circuitry. When you feel like there's more food coming, you get rewarded. Less food, you get hunger. When you feel like your status is going up, you feel fantastic. When you feel like your status is going down, because bad is stronger than good, you feel like death. Okay? When you feel like certainty is going up, you feel pretty good. When you feel more certain about something, when you feel uncertain, you again feel like pain is coming, because bad is stronger than good. Uncertainty activates a threat response in a big way. Even ambiguity lights up the limbic system in a big, big way. Just little ambiguities. Autonomy, when you sense that you have choices, a small stressor becomes, when you detect you have choices, a big stressor becomes small. When you think you have no autonomy and you just got to do what someone else wants, a small stress becomes really big. And finally, fairness, which is kind of self-explanatory, but fairness in and of itself is activating either a reward or a threat. Now, in study after study after study from about 400 different neuroscientists working on these and other fields, what we're seeing is that these threats and rewards are very, very overwhelming and much more than people realize. Much more than people realize, okay? So, yeah, question? Relatedness, I so did. Sorry about that. Uncertainty suddenly rises up. Relatedness is a decision that you make about, are you in my in-group or my out-group? And you make very different decisions when someone's in your in-group. You don't feel pain of someone in your out-group. You don't feel empathy. When someone in your out-group speaks to you, you don't really listen to what they say. We know that intuitively. But in the lab, you actually don't create maps of what they're saying. You use different circuits to actually hear them. When someone's in your in-group, you do experience their pain. You do actually see what they're seeing. You actually see what they're saying. Literally, your occipital lobe lights up. You see what they're saying. So it's friend or foe. It's trust or distrust. It's a decision we make with people. And by the way, foe is the default. So we automatically decide that, that everyone is a foe until proven otherwise, with a couple of exceptions. One is really attractive or familiar people. Babies, everyone stares at babies. And the final one is if you've had too much to drink. And in that case, everyone is your friend. Maybe not everyone, but in some instances, like you suddenly feel like able to talk to strangers. You know that feeling? You go to a party, don't know everyone, you're freaked out, have a few drinks, I talk to everyone. you've shifted from foe to friend. Now, this is very important for collaboration because you don't collaborate well at all with people that you think are foes. Even a slight foe, you'll get very poor collaboration compared to if people think that you're friends. So now you put this together, you see a whole bunch of things. There's a tremendous amount to say about this, but the biggest two seem to be status and certainty. Although everyone's different, everyone's individual, you can't maximize them all at once because too much certainty is no autonomy. But it's about recognizing ahead of time kind of what's going on and using this to improve rewards. This concept of workplace engagement, of being really into what you're doing, means that people are experiencing rewards. They're on the right-hand side. That's what engagement is. Engagement is a brain that's making new connections, has lots of dopamine, is experiencing flow, and it's going for these kinds of status rewards. Now, what does it explain? Well, firstly, let me just say this. If someone comes up to you at work and says, we need to talk about that project, what's that feeling that you get in your stomach? It's like, it's like a jolt, it's a threat, okay? And what about if someone says to you, I need to give you some feedback? It's a jolt, right? It's like a little, it's a concern. That's the status threat. Status is kind of the scary one. We don't talk about it much, but status is really driving our behavior massively, and I'll tell you why. When we feel like we're it's about better than or worse than. When we feel like we've gone up in status in the communities we're in, and it's not about Rolexes and houses, it's just about number, agreed pecking order. When we feel like it's gone up, we get a wonderful reward, and when we feel like it's gone down, we get a very intense threat. The same with the expectation. We feel like it might go up, we get a nice reward. We feel like it might go down, we get an intensely strong threat. So we really, really avoid threats, like we avoid pain. And so we avoid things where our status might go down. And where this plays out is you get this tremendous pushback when you try to change anyone in any way. If I want to change you in any way, I've got to start with the premise that there's something wrong with you, and I've got more information, or I know something, and immediately you're going to get people pushing back because it's a status threat. You see that? It'll happen with your kids, it'll happen with your partner, it'll happen at work, it'll happen everywhere. When you try to change someone, you get a big status threat, and a certainty threat as well, of course. Now, what about, there are two things that are pretty much guaranteed to create very true and full emotional responses that sort of overwhelm you. One is the threat of physical violence. If you think you're about to be physically attacked and going to have pain, you'll stop everything and freak out and really freak out, right? That. Now, the other one is the expression, let me tell you what other people have been saying about you. It also activates, maybe not as intense as real physical violence, but it activates a really strong threat response. And it's also known as the performance review. Okay, let me tell you what others have been saying about you and what's been going on here. It's a very threatening response. So, we've got to work out how to mitigate that, and we try and do that. And it's also known as, you're getting some coaching now. You've got to watch out for that because people will go, what have people been saying about me? Why am I getting coaching? Unless you reframe that, it's quite dangerous. So as someone who, in this room, some of you will manage people. As someone who's a manager, it really, really plays out because it's very easy to be very logical. And when you manage someone, tell them all the things that they should be doing, which impacts their status, and to not provide clear expectations, and to micromanage, and to not trust them, and to not be open. And you get a jackpot. You get a negative jackpot, which is not so good. So it's very easy to drive people crazy as a manager, and you may have experienced that with your managers when they don't let you have autonomy and they, all that stuff sends people really crazy. Now, when you're experiencing lots of rewards, your world is bigger. You actually perceive many more layers of data, you perceive more, width of data, you perceive more information because you've got more prefrontal function and more insight capacity. So this is not a small thing to minimize threat. Minimize threat in these social ways are really important. Now, what about when you find a project that is kind of yours and you can make your mark and you think it's a project that's really cool and maybe it sort of helps the world in some way, even just a small world like your team? What if it sort of like improves and rights a wrong in some way? Then you get passionately, behind that. That's what deep engagement is. Okay, now deep engagement actually involves people who feel like they're increasing their status, and they're increasing their certainty by fixing something that was uncertain, and they're increasing their autonomy by actually doing something, taking action. They're increasing relatedness because you can't do this alone, you've got to connect with others, and they're increasing some decreasing some unfairness. And you start to get the positive jackpot. So the more you can focus on how what you do makes a difference in the world, the more you'll also get that. And the more as an organization you focus on how what you do makes a difference in the world, the more the organization gets these positive rewards as well. So there's a whole bunch of layers that you can look at this framework on. And if you want to know more about this, I'm not going to say buy the book because you'll get an immediate threat response and class me as an out group rather than an in group. But I will say that I'll send you a paper. I'll send you this paper. Just drop your card up here if you want to kind of read into this more. There's a paper called Managing with the Brain in Mind. Anyone who wants it, drop a card and you'll get one email shot from me. You won't go on a database. You'll get one email shot with this and some other links to other resources. Okay, so the social is primary, and it really has a huge impact. Social issues are primary. The final thing to say, then we've got 5 minutes of questions. The final thing to say is that attention changes the brain. Attention actually does change the brain. It changes it in seconds, it turns out, not just in months or weeks or days or hours. It changes it in seconds. The trouble is your attention normally goes to the negative. That's where it always goes. If you want to focus your attention on the future, on something uncertain, it's tricky if you've got a threat response because the space shrinks. If you want to focus your attention on a goal, you need to be kind of feeling safe first because attention won't go easily there. But as you focus attention on things that are intangible, which require a lot of space here, you actually thicken those circuits and you start to see those pieces of the world become alive. So attention changes the brain, but what you've got to do is develop the capacity to control your attention. And I want to finish with this one idea that really the more you understand the brain, the more you become able to control your attention and make attentional choices. And it's almost like this issue of kind of the brain is a Swiss Army knife. And the more you're able to understand what's in this brain of yours, the more you can actually go, no, I'm not going to be problem-focused now. I'm going to be solution-focused. No, I'm not going to be driven by status here. I'm going to focus on the organization's goals. No, I'm not going to be thrown by all this uncertainty. I'm going to actually quieten my mind down for a minute. So the more you understand your brain, the more language you have to make different choices. The only trouble is the brain's a little bit more like that. So you want to practice this and all this. But there's tremendous benefits from very short amounts, like a week of starting to practice just noticing what your brain's doing, for a few minutes a day is having very measurable impacts on all sorts of mental functions and processes there. So, I'm not an advocate for trying to teach people to do long-term attention training. There's tremendous benefits in literally a few minutes a week of practicing different things. So I want to wrap up with this one statement, is that it's possible to optimize internal data processing, and one of the ways to do that is by understanding your brain better. The more you understand the brain, the more you can minimize that threat response, maximize the space in your prefrontal cortex, and maximize insight problem solving. Thank you very much. We've got a couple of minutes for questions. People have any questions? One over there.
I wanted to ask a question about. Sure, sorry.
There's some mics. We'll use those mics. Thank you very much.
In the dichotomy between reappraisal and suppression,
Yeah.
how do we evaluate something like, I'm thinking of a Buddhist monk who's extremely serene. Is that extremely suppressed or extremely reappraised or something
I think
neither?
they've practiced staying in a toward state. There was a funny quote that comes to mind from me from the Dalai Lama, which someone asked him, I don't know if you've heard this, someone asked him, why are you always so happy? He said, because it feels better. In other words, he's kind of doing a reappraisal. He's constantly choosing to be happy, choosing to look at situations and choosing that kind of compassion, that happiness. And it seems that anything you do over and over becomes easier to do and becomes more of a trait, not just a state. So that kind of training is what happens. So I think there's subtle distinctions, and you've got to kind of find the differences in your own brain. But it's very obvious to external person or to some skin conductance technology or to a scanner. It's very obvious, and to ourselves, when we're suppressing and the emotions are still there versus when we've actually changed. And one of the troubles with reappraisal, though it's fabulous, it's really hard to do on your own because it takes cognitive resources. And I'll give you a trick. If you need to reappraise and you haven't got much time and you're overwhelmed, the cheapest form of reappraisal is humor. When things are tough and you go, I'm just going to laugh at this, what do? You actually completely reduce the stress dramatically, don't you? So in an extreme emergency, laugh, and it shifts you from a threat to a toward state. And that's one of the ways that you can manage this. Thank you. Another question.
Hi, I walked in a little bit late, so you'll have to forgive me if you cover this at the beginning.
David is my name. That's where I started. So.
Okay,
yeah.
great. A friend of mine forwarded me your paper, Neuroscience of Mindfulness.
All right,
The article that you did?
The article, yes.
Yeah, and I was trying to paraphrase it for somebody, and I did a bad job. And I wanted to see if maybe you could help me out.
Oh, fantastic. I've got 1 minute to explain the neuroscience of mindfulness.
sorry.
Awesome.
Well,
I'm going to do it. Okay.
You talked about basically kind of the brain's in two modes. There's a perception.
Let me explain it. Basically, that you have two ways of experiencing any moment. One is called the direct experience circuitry. You're taking in data right now. Okay, right now you're taking in data, not focusing on it much, but you could actually stop and take in data like the sound of my voice going, oh. Just hearing me saying, oh. You could listen to that data. When you listen to that data and focus your attention on it, you dampen down what's called the narrative circuitry, which is all the stories and thinking. They're two separate circuits. And when you actually can focus on direct information coming in right now, you actually then perceive more information in all senses. And you stop the kind of story and threat and rambling that goes on. But more importantly, you see more choices. And this is both in the external world and in the internal world. So when you're able to distinguish between directly taking in data and story about data, you become much better at cognitive control. And you can practice that for just moments every day. You can practice that in the shower for 10 seconds a day and you'll get benefits. You can practice it anywhere, the start of a meal. What you just want to do is focus on any kind of incoming data and see how long you can focus your attention on it, and notice when your attention goes back to the narrative, which is story.
Right.
So you're tasting some food, notice yourself tasting the food and the flavors, and then notice yourself thinking about something else entirely and go, oh, narrative, and come back to tasting. And the more you can split, and see these things, then you develop this great cognitive control that really helps you with many other ways. The article's called The Neuroscience of Mindfulness. It's been one of the most popular. I had a whole lot of Buddhists put a fatwa against me, which I only say half jokingly, although if you're going to have a fatwa, it's probably the best religion to have one by. But interestingly, the Dalai Lama Center retweeted it and thought it was fabulous. Because they thought it's really important for people to understand mindfulness. Because I sort of said something as important as being aware of internal states shouldn't be tagged to any religion.
Right.
And I kind of said that's really a problem, that it's been tagged to that religion. And everyone should develop the capacity to notice internal states. It's how you optimize data processing. It's the only way to optimize data processing. So it's kind of a controversial one, but the neuroscience of mindfulness, I'll send that as one of the links. One last question, we're going to wrap up.
You're talking about the direct experience thing reminds me of, I've done a lot of, my mom's an art teacher, most of my family are artists, and I'm sure you've heard of the book Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain.
Yeah, it's a great book, yeah.
Which reminded me a lot, like the whole way that sort of gets you to push down your sort of representations of the world and just look at the...
And just experience directly,
right.
Absolutely. And that right half is a little bit more about direct experience, body and emotions and directly, and the left is more about language and verbalizing. And in schools we tend to teach the left massively and not the right. I'm involved in a project with Dan Siegel. We're both on the board of a school, kind of showing a whole other way of building education, and it is more about the right as well. Yeah.
Right. So it seems, have you... I don't even know what my actual question is here, but just about, have you looked at sort of artists and the way that they work while they're doing their sort of thing? Because you definitely get in sort of an
I think this issue shows up everywhere.
Okay, sure.
And, whether it's an artist or a kite surfer or a table tennis player or a coder, somebody who's doing coding, whatever, many people have experienced this feeling of like taking in data in real time and how amazingly energizing it is and how much more information you have and how much smarter you are, and how much more creative you are. Many people have experienced this and they become so excited by it, they become evangelists and build a whole body of knowledge. But it's essentially people discover the impact of the direct experience circuitry, and you notice a lot more information about the outside and the inside world. You notice many more things about internal visceral states. And it's nothing to do with meditation, it's nothing to do with a religion, it's simply your ability to control your attention to optimize data processing. And I think, especially for senior executives who have massive amounts of data to process, I think it's extremely important that they develop these muscles in any organization, that they develop these muscles to be able to shift between these two states as needed. And it's not about being in one or the other all the time. It's about being adaptive and being able to know when you need to be in which state. So I think it's extremely important. With that, I want to thank Meng and the whole team putting this on, and for you and your attention. I know hardly anyone was on a laptop, which I don't know if that's a record or what, but I'm really impressed with that. And hopefully I think you've made some new connections and some insights. Drop your card up here. I'll send you links to that paper and a bunch of the papers to kind of read and listen to things. And all the best with optimizing your internal data processing. Thank you.